Today, fun stuff for the Nikon crowd. We're going to take a closer, more critical look at pixel shift shooting in the ZF and now in the Z8 and compare it to Adobe's super resolution in Lightroom Classic. I'll show you a couple of lightweight, affordable aftermarket Z lenses that I found surprisingly good. And we'll talk about some of the cool new features in the Z9's firmware 5.0. Hey everyone, it's Hudson. Welcome to this week's video. I've got some fun stuff to talk about, lenses, pixel shift, Z9. So I'm just gonna dive right in. I'll save the Z9 firmware discussion for the end of the video. Not a whole bunch of changes that affect my user settings, but I'll talk through a few of them that do. I wanna talk first about pixel shift shooting. And many of you will remember I did a video on pixel shift shooting right after I got back from Scotland. That was my first trip with the ZF. Pixel shift for Nikon was brand new. I talked about what each of the different settings in pixel shift shooting do, what they yield. We went through, created some examples here, examined those, zoomed in pixel peaking. And you can look at that video. You can click this link right here, or I'm also putting it down in this video's full description. You can click the title or show more. But after I released that video, my good friend Al Akins, who didn't have a ZF and was curious, asked me if he could download the raw files from me. And I sent them to him, and he looked at them all, said it was interesting, and then shot me back some comparison tests with those same images run through super resolution in Adobe's Lightroom Classic. And the results were, to put it mildly, interesting. So I'm going to run through and I'm going to show you the same thing using some real-world examples that Al showed me. And I think it might make you think twice about relying too heavily on pixel shift shooting when some AI up-resing software as good as super resolution exists out there. So let's just jump back on my desktop and I'll run through some images and you can see what I'm talking about looking at the actual pixels. All right, so I'm here in Lightroom Classic with a collection of images. The top 5 here are those images that I used in the original pixel shift video. I created these during the video that I made for you all, and we went through and pixel peeped and looked at each one. One was shot just a single frame, and then the 4-frame pixel shift merger where the camera just samples every color that it captures on every single photoreceptor. Your single frame image, you know, what winds up happening is it samples only red, green, green, blue, red, green, green, blue. Each photoreceptor only gets one of those colors. It does 2 greens for every red and every blue. With the pixel shift shooting at 4-frame pixel shift, it samples every color on every photoreceptor. You don't get any increased resolution. It just gives you better color fidelity, less color noise. You get a cleaner image. And it works really, really well. You can go back and look at that video for the pixel peeping view of that. And then the 8-frame pixel shift merger, which does that whole process twice and then averages any noise out of the image. However, I'm finding with pixel shift, you might lose a little bit of sharpness in blending all of those captures, particularly if there's any motion whatsoever. But even in a situation like this where nothing's moving at all. And then when you go to 16-frame pixel shift, it does that same thing where it samples every color on every photoreceptor, then moves the sensor slightly and does it all again to double the resolution. And as you run through and look at these, you'll see the effects. You know, this is the single frame, this is the dual frame. If we jumped in and we looked at these at 200%, you'd start to see the single frame at 12,800 ISO. Well, not that noisy for 12,800 ISO with the ZF. Gets a lot less noisy with a 4-frame pixel shift. And then it gets even less noisy yet with an 8-frame pixel shift, but maybe just a little teeny bit less sharp. And then we jump up to the 16-frame pixel shift. Not very noisy, lot of resolution. We've doubled our resolution. Now we're up above 96 megapixels with a 24 megapixel sensor. And then the 32-frame pixel shift does that whole 16-frame capture twice and averages more noise out. So it's really the 16 and the 8-frame are all about noise. Well, I did that video. My friend Al Akins, who's a great workshop participant, ATS participant, frequent office hour participant and engineer down in Florida, called me up and said, you know, hey, can I see those raw files? And he ran them through super resolution and then sent me the results and said, do you really think you're getting anything better with pixel shift than we would with super resolution from a single file. And while I think that the pixel shift, especially the 4 and the 8 frame pixel shift, might be getting us a little bit better noise performance, the super resolution is something pretty sweet. And because I've been an On1 Resize AI guy for so long and Genuine Fractals before that, I hadn't really explored super resolution that much. I knew it was out there, but I hadn't played around with it until Al sent it to me. And I'm going to take this real world example. I'm going to walk you through using super resolution versus using pixel shift shooting in the wild. And I'm going to say that if you're drawn to pixel shift shooting, make sure you get a good, really sharp single frame before you do your pixel shift shooting. And we'll talk a little bit when I'm done with this demo on what some of these results really mean to real world usage of all this stuff. But you know, here's this image and they're all edited the same. I edited one and then applied all the editing settings to the others. This is from the Isle of Skye last October, scouting for this workshop that we're doing this fall in Scotland. And this is the old man of Store, all right? And I'm just gonna use the 100% zoom here so you can see the original file nice and sharp. If I jump into 200%, you know, the sharpness starts to break down as it's just up-resing without doing any kind of AI sharp, you know, changes in the file as it's zooming. So a nice sharp, you know, well-captured image of the old man of Store on an interesting morning. Then you take the pixel shift capture that I did of it. You know, here is the 96 megapixel version of it from Nikon, and it's impressive. You know, it looks really good. Is it maybe needs a little bit of sharpening right after the pixel shift? Yeah, but it's still pretty darn good. You know, I don't think it's quite as sharp looking zoomed in, but man, oh man, it's sharper than the original was when we went to 200%. So, all right. Pixel shift got us a bunch of resolution, doubled our resolution as a matter of fact. By combining, you know, I think I did 32 frames, and in the future I'd probably do 16 since I was shooting at base ISO, but the feature was brand new and I didn't understand it as well as I could have before I was out there running around. I got the camera like the day before I left. Now, the interesting thing is, you know, let's take that original file and run it through Lightroom's pixel shift or super resolution. And how do you do that? Well, let's say you're here in the library. Even if you've done edits, you can run up to photo and you can say enhance right here. It's in Lightroom Classic's library or develop photo menu. And this is available for those of you who are using the online stuff with Lightroom CC. It's only available for your photos that you're paying for storage for Adobe. But when you jump in here, you know, you've got denoise, you can turn that off. You got raw details and you have super resolution. And when you turn super resolution on, it does a very similar thing just with, you know, Adobe's, you know, artificial intelligence based algorithms for resizing. And it takes a little time, but it's going to give you, you know, this kind of preview of what it's doing. It's zoomed way, way in. And you just go ahead and click enhance. And what you wind up getting out of it is something that looks like this. This is, you'll get a sRDNG, all right? So it's gonna move from a Nikon file to, you know, an NEF raw file into a DNG. And this is one I clearly have soft proof for printing. That's why it's a purple copy. But you zoom in on this and holy moly, same exact resolution. You know, you take a look at the super resolution file that Nikon did. Oh, it doesn't look quite as sharp, does it? Let's look at those two compared to each other. So this is the 32 frame pixel shift capture coming out of, you know, NX software, comes out an NEFX file, which Lightroom has no problem. The most modern, the most updated version of Lightroom has no problem reading. But look what Adobe does with the single original frame. That's the super resolution version of photo number 162, this file, all right? It just blew it up. Holy cow, all right? I mean, whoa. Let's go into 200%. It's just, yeah, now they're both breaking down about the same amount at 200%, but look how much bigger. You suddenly can print this gargantuan, all right? So that made me start thinking, what about some older files that I wish were a little bit higher resolution to begin with? This photo from Cuba. We were working in my printing workshop. Rick LePage and I had two different groups of people excited about printing here this winter in the studio. And I thought, you know, that old photo of the car in Cuba that I shot with the Z6 and had to crop, I wonder what would happen if I ran it through super resolution. Well, now all of a sudden that old file that was like 18 megapixels is now 89 megapixels, and I printed it big and I love it. So wow, how exciting is that? You know, you start thinking, I wonder about some of the old 12 megapixel images that I captured and some of the old 12 megapixel panoramas. I need to go back and revisit them, doing super resolution on every single file before editing and remerging. It's making me think a lot about some of my old favorite images and how I can harness this power to adjust them. And then, you know, I wondered, well, what happens if you apply this, you know, to something, say, out of the Nikon Q, or the Leica Q3 with its 60 megapixel sensor? And the answer is 241 megapixels when you run super resolution on a file like this. That's just nuts. 240 megapixels. So yeah, I think that what this kind of boils down to and tells me is that if I'm in a situation in a landscape and I'd like to capture every single color on every single photoreceptor, well, you know, take the single shot, make sure I get it dialed and beautiful. That way I can run super resolution on it, and then maybe run it, you know, for the 4-frame pixel shift capture, because it's gonna get a nice cleaner image, all right? The pixel shift version. If it's super noisy, if I'm having to work in really low light, maybe consider the 8-frame, all right? Maybe consider the 16-frame just to play around, but make sure you get that single frame capture, because in my book, you're gonna wind up with a better potential printable image with the super resolution straight out of Adobe's Lightroom. And again, you know, you can do this in Lightroom Classic on any photo in your collection, hard drives wide, all 384,000 of my images I can do this to. If you're in the cloud in Lightroom CC, you're only going to be able to do it with the online photos, which are kind of stored completely separately from your local files. So you'd have to upload an image to the cloud collection or your cloud library, and they don't sync very well. So one more reason why I'm kind of a Lightroom Classic guy to my core. The best quality image that I have from this whole mess is absolutely the super resolution file. And that's exciting to me because that opens that world up to so many images in my library. So hopefully having had a look at that, it'll make you rethink how to use pixel shift in a little bit more nuanced way, and also make you think about playing around with super resolution, both with images that you're shooting in the future, as well as some of the older images that you have. You only need a single frame to take advantage of some pretty amazing up-resing capability that's just built right into Lightroom Classic or into the cloud version of Lightroom CC. So let's talk about these two lenses that I mentioned earlier, these little aftermarket Z lenses. And one is from Viltrox. It's a 20mm 2.8. They hit me up and asked me if I would test it, and because I loved their 75mm 1.2 SP so much, I said, sure, you know, I'll take a look at it. And they sent this little guy to me, and it is very light. It's a 20mm 2.8 autofocus full frame lens. And I thought, you know, how could it compete with the 20mm 1.8 Nikkor that I have? And I don't think that for sharpness, you know, chromatic aberration, I use that 20mm 1.8 all the time for night sky work. But this lens is tiny. It's really small. It's really, really lightweight. It's really affordable for those who are on more of a budget. And I was shocked by the image quality. So, you know, I'll show you how that all works out. It is a small, lightweight, high quality little lens. It's got a little hood. I'm not a big fan of using hoods on lenses like these. I mostly just put a lens cap on. I noticed that the lens cap doesn't really lock into place when you put it on. I would probably just stick that away in a drawer and stick it in the bag like this. But if you want a lightweight little wide angle lens to carry around, particularly for a camera like the ZF or the Z6. I think this thing's surprisingly good, and it shows up, it holds up to higher resolution like the Z9 quite well too. So, you know, surprising. And then the other lens, we'll jump back and we'll look at both of these, is this little TT Artisan 10 millimeter for Nikon DX. So this is more for your Z50, your ZFC camera, your Z30, and hopefully some new APS-C camera that should be coming soon, I'm hoping. But I still love my Z50. My son Pike shoots my Z50 a lot. And so, you know, they said they had a 10 millimeter. I was interested in it. I tested another 10 millimeter lens from another company recently that I really found disappointing and sent back without reviewing. I put it to my brick wall test and it just didn't test well. This one is a little bit different story. It's very small. It's metal. It's heavy for the size. You know, it's not a heavy lens, but it's heavy for what it is. It's metal. The build quality is really beautiful. It's got, you know, aperture, half aperture stops from 2 all the way up to 16. It's a 10 millimeter for DX, so it's going to give you a 15 millimeter view of the world. Nice feeling manual focus ring, really light and compact, and then it comes with this little metal hood that puts it out to 72 millimeter filter rings. So I immediately just put a 72 to 82 millimeter case magnetic filter adapter, and that way you can use this little ultra wide with filters lickety split, and you get a metallic, you know, a magnetic lens cap for it. Woo! So, you know, I will say that testing these two lenses surprised me, and let's just jump on the computer and I'll show you why. All right, so whenever a company asks me to test out a new lens, and you know, like TT Artisans did with this little 10 millimeter f2 manual focus, simple, tiny, interesting little lens, the first thing I do is run down to my kid's school and I photograph a brick wall. I get set up level, squared to the wall, on a tripod, use exposure delay, and I shoot the wall as focused as possible, and I have a look to see, you know, what is the vignetting like? What is the sharpness like edge to edge at different apertures? Does this lens perform very well? And I'll tell you, I have sent more aftermarket lenses back saying they don't meet my criteria. And this little tiny, you know, small 10 millimeter lens, I didn't have high hopes for, but it surprised me. And it led me to do a little bit more testing. I'll just show you a few images and why I'm going to continue playing around with it going forward, and why it makes it in my bag as this tiny little 15 millimeter equivalent. You know, it's a DX crop, so it's going to crop in on a full frame sensor, and you don't get any exposure information. I just had to remember that you know, that it starts at f2, it ends at f16, and I shot it in order on full stop. So this is the f2 frame. It transmits no exposure data, and if I zoom into 100%, you know, not bad. Actually, for wide open f2, not a whole lot of distortion, a little bit of vignetting, but not too bad. But that vignetting really cleans up. When you look at it, it cleans up by about f4, f5, 6. It's really clean. f8, you know, kind of where you expect a lens to perform at its best. We jump in here at f2.8, you know, not a huge shift. Maybe a little sharper at the edge. The corners, yeah, they're slightly soft. The center's getting nice and sharp. We jump out to f4, yeah, sharpening up everywhere. We go to f5, 6, whoa, quite a little performer at f5, 6. f8, zeeks, almost no vignetting, wow. f11, also f8, f11, this thing is sharp center to edge. f16, losing a little sharpness to diffraction, not to be, you know, unexpected at f16. Interesting, I thought. You know, how does this thing focus close? I came home, I was having a beer at dinner time, focused in on my beer can, and you know, when I brought this image into the computer, this is just straight out of the computer, I was pretty surprised. You know, it did a nice job focusing on the rim of the can, and the out of focus section of the image, pretty darn nice. I thought, well, you know, what about chromatic aberration and shooting it straight into bright sunlight? So, you know, the next morning I went out, shot it, the sun peeking through a tree at dawn in my yard. Interesting sun star. You know, you got your 6-pointed star here, real nice sharp edges, something that's a little bit unusual in the Nikon Z world, and not really any noticeable bad chromatic aberration, you know, color fringing around the shadow to highlight sections in this frame. I was like, huh. I had my little girl Pepper hop out on my porch, backlit, and shot her, manually focusing. I zoomed in, focused on this eye, I believe. I probably should have focused on that eye. But, you know, wow, it's at 125th of a second. I like the way that it's rendering the out of focus details. You know, it's not the Leica Q3, it's not the 105 1.4 or the Plena, but, you know, for a little tiny 10mm lens, pretty surprising. And then I was out and I was doing a little work with a Leica Q2 monochrome and a Leica Q3, and I was down on the downtown waterfront, and I thought, you know, I wonder what this thing would do with a water, you know, with a city lights at night scene. And I stopped down to f11 and did a 10-second exposure base ISO with the Z50 of downtown Portland at night. And you can see it 100%. Wow. You know, not too shabby. And I love the stars at f11. So you don't have to go to f16 and get that diffraction to get these interesting renderings of stars and night scenes. I gotta say, this little lens is interesting, and I'm gonna slap it on and test it during Milky Way season and potentially throw it in the bag when I don't really have room for the 14 to 24, but I might want something, you know, in the wider than 24mm world, because this little tiny lens surprises. All right, here we are with the Viltrox 22.8. Same basic, you know, scenario that I would test any other lens. I just showed you with the 10mm, and I have both these lenses at the same time. This one autofocuses. This one reads through all the exposure information. It digitally interfaces with the cameras. I shot a bunch of stuff with this. This is with the Z9 at full 47 megapixels. It's a full frame, little tiny affordable lens. It feels a bit plasticky and cheap, but holy cow. You know, let's take a look here. I'm gonna change to my exposure values here. So we're at f2.8, wide open here. You go into 100%. Man, Viltrox, you know, it loses a little sharpness at the corner, wide open, but not bad. Let's look at it at f4. Loses a little less sharpness going out to the corner, still nice and sharp in the center. We go to f5.6. It's nice at f5.6. We go to f8, sharp. Holy cow, sharp right out to the edge at f8. f11, same thing. I'd say f8, f11 are your best apertures with this little guy. Get to f16, again, diffraction starts to just be a little less sharp. Not bad though, not bad at all. And that caused me, because this lens is autofocus, I took it on a walk to school on my ZF, and was just, you know, this is morning. We're so fortunate we get to walk with the kids to school every morning and afternoon. So, you know, it's on the walk to school, wide open, playing around with the kids, autofocusing with the ZF. Pepper's about to lose. She's lost one of these two teeth. The other one is wobbly as heck. She's about to have a giant gap there. You know, tracking Stacy and her, it focuses nice and fast, catching them running. Backlight, again, don't see much chromatic aberration to speak of. Doing a pretty good job not flaring into pretty hot backlight there. Catching my little boy Pike as he runs by their school's sign. The Sunstar, maybe not as beautiful as that 10mm TT Artisan, but a nice clean Sunstar. You know, this is your real chromatic aberration test. I'm not seeing much fringing. Haven't touched this file. We definitely have some hot lights. It looks pretty darn good. I did an HDR of this, I think. No, this is just another. This is just blowing it up a little bit, you know, a little bit brighter, a little more sun coming in. Still not much chromatic aberration, not bad breaking down straight into backlight. The portrait shot background is nice and lovely at f2.8. Again, you know, no Leica Q3, but not bad for the lens that this is, you know, a worthy little dude to carry. And then I took it into that same night shooting scenario downtown. I stopped it down to f8, 10-second exposure. Actually, I might have shot the Viltrox at f8. There's the problem with not knowing what exposure that camera is transmitting. This one I know it's at f8, 100 ISO, 10 seconds. Given that they were back to back, the other one might have been f8 as well, or I might have shot it a little bit earlier and it was f11. I don't know. Beautiful sun stars either way on that 10mm that I just did. This one, the sun stars aren't as beautiful. They're more like we're used to with a lot of the new Z lenses. You know, they kind of, they don't have those spiky blades coming off the sun. They sort of fan out and get wider the further from the point source. But, you know, I don't see any lack of sharpness in this thing at f8. It's probably its best shooting aperture. Does pretty well with those little point sources. It's a really, really nice little lens. So, shocked with both of those. So, I think you can see that these two little lenses surprised me a bit. They're just better than they should be, and you know, I think they'll be making it in my bag when I don't necessarily have room to carry the bigger Nikon versions of the lenses, but I still want the capability to work at those kinds of focal lengths and those kinds of apertures. So particularly the little 10mm 2.0, surprising. I love those little sun stars. So I'm excited to practice with these both a little bit more, and I'll share those results as I go along. Also, it'll be fun to shoot night scenes with the 10mm and see what kind of image results I get with that, maybe on the Z9. All right, so we'll talk about that as Milky Way season comes in. I want to talk briefly before I sign off, though, that right before I did this video, they released the Z9 firmware 5.0, and there were some surprises. I really expected firmware 5.0 to bring pixel shift shooting to the Z9, kind of relevant to this particular video. And interestingly enough, it didn't. They did revamp auto capture a little bit. They added a little bit more flexibility in what distance you set for automatically capturing subjects that come into the frame. They let you set timing parameters so that it's only going to be active at certain times so you don't waste battery when you set it up long in advance and left it out there. They added planes, a big shocker. Everybody was like, why isn't bird auto detect in the Z8? I don't know, they probably will get around to it. They probably were working on this before bird detect autofocus came along and plane was there, so they added it. I don't know, interestingly enough. It sure seems like different teams of people are working on the different cameras firmware, because given how similar the Z8 and the Z9 are on the inside, they've got different updates. They did some stuff for portrait photographers, face smoothing, those kinds of things, a new picture control setting for JPEG shooters that do portraits. They divided the video settings in the banks from the photo settings, so you can be in different modes and different shutter speeds and those kinds of things in video than you can in still settings within a single bank. And that's a nice thing for those of us who do hybrid shooting. They added a different flicker reduction setting for people that work with really high-speed LED lights that's adjustable, so that's a nice thing. The big things for me, though, the ones that are actually more important, well, they had a thing that excited me that I saw. The thing that caught my eye right off the bat was this thing that said that it'll display maximum aperture in live view when manually focusing, and I thought, whew, I actually read it wrong. I was thinking minimum aperture, because a lot of people that have been following me for a while know my frustration that not a single Z camera allows those of us who love shooting in the landscape to zoom in and preview final aperture in live view before we take the shot while we're actually looking through the lens at anything smaller than f5.6. You can stop down, you can depth of field preview in fit view where you see your entire scene, and you can see what the final aperture is going to look like. But when you zoom in on the frame and try to preview final aperture, it jumps back out to fit view. And in still shooting mode, there is no way to preview any final aperture zoomed in while crafting a landscape image any smaller than f5.6. It's just impossible with every single Z camera that came along. And I initially read that as, oh wow, they're going to let us do it in manual focus. But no, it's the opposite, actually. It's a setting that just keeps the cameras wide open when you're focusing, no matter what your final aperture is if you're in manual focus. And that's got its place too. If you want to dial in precision focus on a single point and you want that to be what's primarily in focus, well then staying wide open, even though you're going to shoot a little narrower aperture, that makes sense. But I would love them to go the opposite way too. In manual focus, let us see the world stop down. Let us zoom while we're stopped down. That would be great. But alas, they haven't given us that yet. They have a new setting, A11, in the custom setting menu. Will let you make your focus point a little bit wider lines, delineating that. For people that have a hard time seeing that little box moving around, you can go small, medium, or large now. The old default was small. I think medium's really nice. For me personally, I've shifted to medium in all of my banks. If you're gonna update your banks, you gotta go into each one of the banks and change A11 so that your focus point's a little bit bigger. The custom settings banks. Custom setting D19. That's a cool one that I'm turning on in all my settings. That's if you're in manual focusing, you zoom in. So you hit the OK button under my settings to zoom into 100% while you're manually focusing. A half press of the shutter button will take you back to a fit view. That's really cool. I can't wait for that to come to the ZF with its automatic eye detect aid for autofocus, for manually focusing, because then you could zoom into 100%, focus the eye perfectly, and a half touch of the shutter button would take you back instead of having to go hit the OK button again to pop back out. So in each of my settings, each of my custom settings banks, I went in and changed D19 to on for those moments when you're manually focusing landscapes. You can just hit the shutter button halfway and it bumps you out of that zoomed in view. Then F3 gives you some new kind of cool custom controls when you're in playback mode. It's going to open up a lot more buttons to customize while you're in playback mode. You can customize a button to do all manner of things: voice recording, a memo on the image, view the histogram, jump back to shooting mode, star an image, protect an image. It opens up a lot of your function buttons and custom buttons on the back of the camera. And the most interesting one to me are the command dials. It lets you adjust how the command dials behave while you're reviewing images. And you can program them to do two different things. So you can tell the right command dial to, or the back, the main command dial that your thumb uses on the back. You can have it so that as you move from image to image using the command dials, you can zoom in, say to 100%, like I like to preview images when I'm checking for sharpness, and you can tell it you wanted to jump to the focus point on each frame instead of saying zoomed in on the same point. So you can say focus point with eyes as the priority, which is really cool for those that shoot portraits. So it'll stay on the eyes as you're moving from image to image to image to image that you were focused on, and that's really, really handy. You can also tell it how many images to advance by, so you can set the front dial to maybe advance by 10 frames instead of 1 frame. That's kind of cool too. So it lets you do different things, and it also lets you have settings for what you're doing if you're reviewing videos. You can make those dials jump fast forward to 10 frames or 10 seconds. So some pretty cool things you can do with the dials while you're doing image review are opened up in the F3 custom setting button. Now again, if you want to go in and make some of these changes and take advantage of these new firmware capabilities, you're going to have to do it in each of your recorded banks so that those settings are going to be active in all of your different banks. So cool stuff, not anything earth-shattering, but incremental improvements that they keep giving us via firmware. And you gotta love Nikon for that. All right, everybody, so thanks so much for watching. We'll be having a free office hours before very long here, big free photography get together. Those are always on Tuesdays at 10 a.m. Pacific. You can click right here to see when the next one is, sign up, leave a question. Hope to see you there. Those are always a ton of fun. They're on Zoom and YouTube Live. We've got a whole bunch of workshops going down right now. We are in the busy part of the spring, early summer workshop season with workshops in Charleston, Mazatlan for the total eclipse, Costa Rica. So you'll be hearing some fun stuff from the road and seeing some of the stuff that we're capturing with great groups of photographers out there in the field. You have any questions or comments or things you'd like to know more about, your comments and suggestions drive the content of this channel, so just leave them in the comments section of this video or email me. I'm easy to get a hold of. Thanks so much for watching, sharing, liking, subscribing, and I hope you're all staying safe and staying creative, and we'll see you next week.